September 1940. Los Angeles, California. The noise of the factory floor was relentless. Hammers, welders, men shouting above the metallic thunder of an America not yet at war. At the head of North American Aviation, a hard-driving engineer named James Dutch Kindleberger stood over a set of blueprints and made a promise that would change aviation history. Across the ocean, Britain was burning. The Battle of Britain had ended in victory, but the RAF squadrons were bleeding for aircraft. Curtiss could not deliver enough P-40 Tomahawks. The British Purchasing Commission turned to North American with a simple request: build P-40s under license. Kindleberger's answer was anything but simple. We can do better than that. Give us 120 days, and we'll give you a new fighter. It was a gamble born of pride, not necessity. North American had never built a frontline fighter. Yet in those months, engineers worked day and night, sketching an airframe that promised the impossible: speed, range, and elegance wrapped around an unproven engine. The result was sleek, low, and fast, a laminar flow wing that sliced air instead of fighting it, a fuselage built for mass production, and a cockpit that seemed to grow from the metal itself. The Allison V-1710 engine was chosen out of convenience, not brilliance. It would prove both the aircraft's heart and its first great flaw. April 1941. The prototype rolled from the hangar at Mines Field under a blinding California sun. Test pilots called it beautiful, quick, responsive. The British called it Mustang, after the wild horses of the American West. The name fit, but beauty in war is not enough. When the first Mustangs reached England later that year, RAF pilots found the truth hiding in the thin air above 15,000 feet. The Allison engine gasped for oxygen. The aircraft's speed fell away, its climb turned sluggish. At altitude, the wild stallion stumbled. London's verdict was swift and pragmatic. The Mustang would not hunt with the Spitfires. Instead, it would scout, dive, and photograph. The RAF assigned it to Army Cooperation Command, low-level reconnaissance, artillery spotting, and ground attack. August 19, 1942, Dieppe. Gray dawn over the French coast. Mustangs streaked barely 50 feet above the channel, cameras mounted where guns should have been. Their first mission was a slaughterhouse, the Dieppe raid. Smoke, flak, shattered ships. The Mustangs came back scarred but proven. They could take punishment. They could fly low and fast. They could survive. Across the Atlantic, the United States had entered the war. The Army Air Forces diverted a small batch of British-bound Mustangs to their own use. They too would be sent to the mud and treetops, not the stratosphere. No one yet saw destiny taking shape in the polished aluminum skin. To the generals, the Mustang was a stopgap. To its designers, a prototype with potential. To the pilots who flew it, a restless creature waiting for the right heart to make it soar. That heart was being forged unknowingly thousands of miles away, in the quiet engine shops of Derby, England, where Rolls-Royce was perfecting a power plant called the Merlin 61. In a few months' time, British mechanics would bolt one of those engines into the Mustang's narrow frame, and the world's skies would never look the same again. January 1942. England. Snow drifted against the hangar doors at RAF Duxford as a group of pilots clustered around the unfamiliar shape of their new fighter. The North American Mustang I, low-slung, glassy-nosed, painted in dull camouflage. To some, it looked alien, an American upstart in a British stable dominated by Spitfires and Hurricanes. Squadron leader Peter Wycombe Barnes ran his glove along the fuselage and frowned. "She's fast, all right," he muttered, "but only when she can breathe." He was right. At 15,000 feet, the Allison engine still roared like a lion. Beyond that, it wheezed. The Mustang was a sprinter trapped in a marathoner's world. The Royal Air Force quickly understood what they had, and what they didn't. They reassigned the aircraft to the Army Cooperation Command, a polite euphemism for dangerous, low-level work. The Mustangs would fly where the clouds hugged the ground, photographic runs, artillery spotting, tactical reconnaissance. It was perilous, intimate flying, dodging church steeples and telephone wires, listening to the whistle of rifle bullets through the wings. Yet in this grim new role, the Mustang began to earn respect. Its aerodynamic shape allowed it to skim terrain at breathtaking speed. Its cockpit visibility was unmatched. Pilots returned from missions with gun camera footage that stunned intelligence officers, bridges, tanks, troop convoys, all captured in crisp detail from barely 100 feet above the earth. August 19, 1942. The Dieppe raid. The channel was slick with oil and blood. Operation Jubilee, an Allied test assault on the French coast, had turned catastrophic within hours. Amid the chaos, Mustang pilots flew hundreds of sorties at treetop height, strafing coastal defenses and photographing enemy positions for post-raid analysis. They lost men, machines, and innocents that morning. But they also revealed something the Allies desperately needed to see: courage married to performance. Even grounded by its own engine, the Mustang was a weapon worth refining. Across the Atlantic, the U.S. Army Air Forces were watching. The attack on Pearl Harbor had dragged America fully into the war, and the need for a versatile, fast-attack plane was immediate. The early Mustangs, originally bound for Britain, were diverted to American units almost as soon as they left the factory floor. They were given a new designation, A-36 Apache, dive brakes, bomb racks, and a new mission, dive bombing. It was a desperate experiment, born from the Army's frustration with its aging Douglas dauntless fleet. Spring 1943. North Africa. The sun hammered the desert as the 27th and 86th Bombardment Groups took off from forward airfields near Maison Blanche. Their targets, German convoys and supply depots feeding the Africa Corps. The A-30 screamed into near-vertical dives, dropping 500-pound bombs on the enemy's lifelines. The price was heavy. Flak tore through their wings, machine guns peppered the skies, but they struck with precision and ferocity. In dusty tent camps, pilots wrote home about the Mustang that could dive like a Stuka and turn like a Spit. Mechanics, however, cursed its liquid-cooled engine, vulnerable to a single bullet through its radiator. The Allison-powered Mustang was learning to kill, but also to die. In the months that followed, A-30 flew over Italy and China in the hands of pilots who made up for mechanical limits with sheer daring. They became the unsung workhorses of tactical warfare, quick to strike, quicker to vanish. And yet, even as they proved their worth in mud and fire, everyone who flew them knew the same unspoken truth: this was not the Mustang's final form. The airframe begged for altitude. The wings longed for thin air and open sky. All it needed was an engine that could breathe at 20,000–30,000 feet. That answer would come not from an American engineer, but from a British genius with oil-stained hands and a quiet conviction that he could make a miracle out of metal. In the workshops of Rolls-Royce, the Merlin was waiting. October 1942. Hucknall Aerodrome, England. The hangar doors creaked open into the cold Midlands air as a small group of engineers gathered around a prototype that looked almost familiar. Almost. Its sleek American frame remained, but something inside had changed, something alive. Bolted to the nose of this new Mustang was a Rolls-Royce Merlin 61, the same engine that powered the Spitfire Mk9, a 12-cylinder symphony of pistons, superchargers, and engineering brilliance. As the test pilot, Ronald Harker, eased the throttle forward, the Merlin came alive with a sound different from any Allison before it. A deeper growl, a sharper promise. The aircraft surged down the runway, tail lifting, wheels kissing tarmac, and then it was gone, a silver streak rising into the English sky. Minutes later, it returned with a trail of vapor high above the airfield, higher than any Allison Mustang had ever dared to climb. When Harker landed, his grin said everything. Gentlemen, this is no longer a tactical reconnaissance aircraft. This is a fighter. That single flight rewrote the destiny of the P-51. November 1942. Packard Motor Car Company, Detroit. While Britain fought for survival, America's factories were roaring awake. Rolls-Royce, overwhelmed with wartime demand, licensed the Merlin design to the Packard Motor Car Company. The men who once built luxury automobiles now crafted precision engines capable of propelling a fighter into the stratosphere. They called it the Packard V1650, but it was a Merlin in every way that mattered: twin-stage, 2-speed supercharger, 1,600 horsepower, and lungs powerful enough to breathe over the frozen fields of Europe. December 1942. Inglewood, California. Inside North American's plant, Kindleberger watched as the first P-51B prototype rolled out, its sleek lines subtly altered to accommodate the new engine. He knew what it meant before anyone flew it. The Mustang's heart had finally caught up with its body. April 1943. Wright Field, Ohio. The U.S. Army Air Force's test pilots took the new P-51B skyward and found a different animal altogether. Gone was the low-altitude restlessness. Now the Mustang climbed like a rocket, fought cleanly above 30,000 feet, and reached speeds over 440 miles per hour. It could turn with a Spitfire, dive with a Thunderbolt, and outlast them both. For the first time, America had a fighter that could escort its bombers all the way to Berlin and back. Summer 1943. England. At Allied headquarters, the air war over Europe was in crisis. B-17s and B-24s, flying fortresses in name only, were being shredded by German fighters. P-47 Thunderbolts had power, but not range. P-38 Lightnings had range, but suffered from engine issues in cold European skies. And then, from across the Atlantic, came a whisper: there's a new plane in testing, something extraordinary. RAF test pilots compared the Mustang Mk3, their designation for the Merlin-powered version, to the Spitfire. The verdict was astonishing. The Mustang was faster at altitude, handled better at high speed, and could fly twice the distance. In a world where range equaled victory, the Mustang suddenly mattered more than any other aircraft in the Allied arsenal. But the transition would not be immediate. Political infighting, production bottlenecks, and the inertia of military bureaucracy all conspired to delay the Mustang's arrival in Europe's skies. Still, the decision had been made. The P-51 was no longer an experiment. It was the future. Soon, American engineers would begin modifying its frame for extra fuel tanks, extended missions, and long-range escort duty. And in England, one of the most outspoken, fearless fighter leaders, a man named Donald Blakesley, was about to make sure that this airplane would not sit idle in a hangar. He would take it to war, November 1943. Debden Airfield, England. The wind cut through the thin English rain as Lieutenant Colonel Donald Blakesley stalked across the tarmac, his flying coat flaring behind him like a general's banner. The men of the 4th Fighter Group watched their commander in wary silence. Blakesley was not a man to be interrupted, not when he walked like that. Moments earlier, he had landed from his first flight in the new P-51B Mustang. The ground crew barely had time to chock the wheels before he'd thrown back the canopy, ripped off his oxygen mask, and barked at the nearest officer. "This is it. This is the one we've been waiting for." Blakesley was no ordinary pilot. He had fought with the Royal Air Force Eagle squadrons before America entered the war, earning a reputation as both a tactician and a daredevil. Now he led one of the most aggressive American fighter groups in Europe, and he was tired of being outrun by the Luftwaffe. The 4th had been flying P-47 Thunderbolts, big, tough, but thirsty. They could protect bombers over France, but not over Germany. Once the Thunderbolts hit their fuel limit and turned home, the German fighters came in swarms. The B-17s were slaughtered in the thin, frigid air above the Reich. Blakesley had seen enough burning fortresses to last a lifetime. The first Merlin-powered Mustangs to reach England were intended for 9th Air Force, a tactical command slated to support the upcoming invasion of France. But Blakesley and the officers of 8 Fighter Command had other ideas. They needed those planes for one purpose: to escort bombers all the way to the heart of Germany. December 1943. U.S. 8th Air Force Headquarters, High Wycombe. Inside a dim war room crowded with maps, coffee cups, and cigarette smoke, the debate raged. Tactical or strategic? Ground support or deep escort? Blakesley's argument was brutally simple. If we can't get the bombers to their targets, there won't be any invasion to support. Behind the scenes, air leaders like General William Kepner and General Ira Eaker pressed Washington for a decision. They had watched daylight raids turn into daylight massacres. They needed an escort that could fly from England to Berlin, fight, and return. The Mustang was that aircraft. Politics met pragmatism, and the Mustang was reassigned. The first P-51B equipped units, including Blakesley's 4th and the 357th Fighter Group, would go to 8th Air Force. January 1944. Debden. At dawn, the field came alive. Ground crews rolled out rows of gleaming Mustangs, olive drab and shark-nosed, condensation curling from their exhaust stacks. The air smelled of gasoline, damp earth, and anticipation. Blakesley gathered his pilots by the wing of his own aircraft, marked SXB. "Listen up," he said. "No one's going to call this a test flight. This isn't practice. We're going to Berlin and back." That morning, the 4th Fighter Group climbed into the cold gray sky and headed east. Over the bombers, they formed a shimmering shield of aluminum and resolve. When the German Messerschmitts came, sleek, deadly, diving from the sun, the Mustangs met them head-on. At 25,000 feet, the Merlin engine sang its war song. The Mustang could now climb with the Bf-109, dive faster than the FW-190, and stay in the fight as long as its pilot dared. The Germans noticed. For months, their fighters had waited just beyond the range of Allied escorts, striking bombers only when the Americans turned back for fuel. Now the hunters found the hunted waiting for them, with range to spare. By the end of winter, the pattern had changed. The Luftwaffe was no longer attacking bombers with impunity. They were fighting for their survival. Blakesley's report to 8 Fighter Command was blunt. The P-51 is the best damn escort fighter in the world. Give me more of them, and we'll give you the skies. He wasn't exaggerating. The Mustang's long legs and lethal speed allowed American bombers to reach Berlin by daylight, something considered suicidal only months earlier. The 8th Air Force had found its savior, and the Luftwaffe had found its doom. But the transformation was far from complete. The Mustang still carried flaws that could kill its pilot as surely as any German bullet: balance issues, fuel instability, cockpit freezing at altitude. And as the air war over Europe reached its bloody crescendo, those flaws would be tested to their limits. For now, though, the Allied pilots finally had an aircraft that could escort the fight straight into the enemy's heart. The Wild Horse had found its wings, February 1944. Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. The winter wind whipped across the tarmac as engineers huddled beneath the belly of a gleaming P-51B. The Merlin engine had solved the altitude problem, but another obstacle now stood between the Mustang and its destiny: range. On the drafting boards inside the hangar, technicians penciled new lines across the fuselage: auxiliary tanks, wing-mounted drop tanks, plumbing for transfer systems that would feed fuel in flight. The arithmetic of survival was simple but unforgiving. Berlin lay 580 miles from the English coast. The bombers needed an escort that could fly there, fight, and return. At full throttle, the Merlin could drain its tanks before the bombers reached the target. The solution was to turn the Mustang into a flying fuel drum. Engineers installed an 85-gallon fuselage tank behind the pilot's seat, supplementing the 184 gallons already stored in the wings. The modification extended the aircraft's reach deep into Germany, but came at a price. Test pilots quickly discovered that with a full rear tank, the Mustang's center of gravity shifted dangerously aft. At high speed, it became twitchy, unstable, a predator with a broken spine. In combat maneuvers, one false move could send the aircraft into an unrecoverable spin. The field solution was brutal but effective: burn the rear tank dry before engaging. Only once the extra fuel was gone could a Mustang fight at full agility. Every mission became a delicate dance between range and readiness, survival and risk. March 1944. RAF Leiston, Suffolk. Captain Clarence Bud Anderson of the 357 Fighter Group sat in his Mustang, Old Crow, watching vapor trails drift across the high blue sky. You had to trust her, he'd recall later. Treat her right. Keep her light when it mattered, heavy when it didn't. She'd take you home if you didn't fight her too hard. On those early long-range missions, the P-51s carried twin 75-gallon drop tanks under their wings, giving them nearly 8 hours of endurance. But those same tanks created drag and made the Mustangs sluggish until they were emptied and jettisoned. It was a dangerous equation. The Mustangs couldn't fight effectively until they dropped their tanks, but dropping them too early meant not making it home. Every mission tested both machine and man. High above Germany, March 6, 1944, the first daylight raid on Berlin. 800 bombers, 600 escorting fighters. The P-47s turned back over the Ruhr. The P-38s made it a little farther. The Mustangs went the distance. For the first time in the war, American bombers reached Berlin with fighter cover. The Luftwaffe scrambled everything it had: Me-109s, FW-190s, even the new twin-engine Me-410s. But they no longer attacked with impunity. At 30,000 feet, the Merlin's supercharger roared as Mustangs slashed through the formations. The Luftwaffe's long-range tactics, shadow the bombers until their escorts ran out of fuel, no longer worked. The hunters had become the hunted. Spring 1944. England. 8th Fighter Command issued new standing orders. When escort duties were complete, fighters were free to sweep the deck, to dive on enemy airfields, trains, and fuel convoys on the way home. Mustang pilots took to the rule with evangelical zeal. Each raid ended with a trail of burning Luftwaffe bases, shredded locomotives, and strafed supply lines. The P-51 had become more than an escort. It was an instrument of air supremacy. But flying deep into occupied Europe brought its own brutal lessons. At -40 degrees, the cockpit heaters failed more often than not. Frost crept across canopies, oxygen masks froze, and control cables stiffened. Pilots joked grimly that the Mustang could outfly anything except the cold. Still, they went back, every day, every mission. By June 1944, the skies over Western Europe were changing. The Luftwaffe, once master of the continent, was now burning its fuel reserves faster than it could replace them. The Allied bombing of refineries in Romania and synthetic fuel plants in Germany starved the German air arm at its roots. The Mustang, with its long reach and relentless aggression, made sure they never recovered. Yet even in triumph, the P-51 was not the only sword in the Allied arsenal. The P-47 Thunderbolt remained the hammer of close air support, and the P-38 Lightning still struck deep into occupied France. But the Mustang had become the face of victory, sleek, lethal, and omnipresent in the skies. From the cold dawn of England to the smoke of Berlin, the wild horse ran farther, faster, and freer than any fighter before it. May 1944. Somewhere over western Germany. The sky was crowded, contrails twisting into a silver web above the clouds. Below, the 8th Air Force bombers droned eastward in endless waves, their gun turrets glinting in the sun. Flanking them, 3 kinds of American fighters carved protective arcs through the thin air: the P-38 Lightning, the P-47 Thunderbolt, and the new P-51 Mustang. Each was born of a different philosophy. Each fought a different war. The Thunderbolt was the brute, a radial engine monster, armored like a tank, beloved by the men who trusted its bulk to soak up enemy fire. Its 8.50 caliber machine guns could shred a locomotive or an enemy formation in seconds. But it was thirsty, and at high altitude it gasped against the thin air. The Lightning was the eccentric genius, twin booms, twin engines, and a cockpit suspended like an insect between them. It could fly farther than any single-engine fighter alive, but it demanded discipline. Lose one engine over enemy territory, and you were a dead man coasting home on luck and altitude. And then there was the Mustang, slender, understated, almost elegant. It was the blade to the other's hammer, built not to absorb punishment, but to avoid it entirely. In the hands of a skilled pilot, it could dance through the air like liquid metal. But rivalry simmered beneath the shared mission. Thunderbolt men, proud of their aircraft's toughness, sneered that Mustang pilots flew glass slippers. Mustang men shot back that P-47s drank more fuel than a destroyer and couldn't catch their own shadows. The Lightning crews, stretched thin between theaters, looked down on both, reminding anyone who would listen that they'd been flying to Berlin before the others even tried. The arguments were fierce, but beneath the swagger lay a deeper truth. The U.S. Army Air Forces were learning the mathematics of modern air power. The war in the sky was not won by a single machine, but by the harmony of many. Over Normandy, June 6, 1944. D-Day. Before dawn, the Thunderbolts of the 9th Air Force roared low over the Channel, strafing trains and bridges. Their role was brutal and direct: destroy everything that moved. Above them, the Mustangs of the 8th patrolled at altitude, guarding the lumbering C-47s that carried the paratroopers of the 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions. When the sun rose over the beaches of France, the Luftwaffe was conspicuously absent. Its silence spoke volumes. The once mighty German air arm was being smothered, not just by Allied numbers, but by exhaustion. The relentless Mustang sweeps into Germany had forced the enemy to fight over their own fields, to burn their dwindling fuel reserves defending their homeland. In the mess tents and briefing huts, American pilots now debated tactics, not survival. The P-51 had changed everything. With the Mustang's range, bomber crews no longer dreaded the long return flight through unguarded skies. The Thunderbolts, freed from escort duty, became devastating ground attack aircraft, the scourge of German armor from Normandy to the Rhine. Still, the rivalry never died. When statistics circulated through headquarters showing the 56th Fighter Group, Flying Thunderbolts, as the highest-scoring American air unit in Europe, Mustang pilots bristled. They knew the truth behind the numbers. The P-47 had started the fight early and stayed in it long. The Mustang had arrived later, but had finished the job. And perhaps that was fitting. The P-47 had opened the skies of Europe. The P-51 had cleared them. By the summer of 1944, 8 fighter commands' transformation was complete. Squadron by squadron, the big radial engine Thunderbolts were replaced by sleek Mustangs. The war in the air was evolving from brawl to ballet. Speed, precision, and endurance now ruled over brute strength. September 1944. Debden, England. Donald Blakesley, the same man who'd fought to get the P-51 into combat, now stood over a map of Germany, his finger tracing lines of attack. The raids went farther every week. The Mustang's range, once an experiment, was now a weapon in itself. "Gentlemen," he told his pilots, "the Luftwaffe is dying. Don't give them a chance to recover. Hunt them. In the air, on the ground, in their hangars. Make them afraid to start their engines." It was not bravado. It was prophecy. Within weeks, Allied fighters were striking deep beyond the Rhine, turning Luftwaffe airfields into graveyards of steel and ash. The Mustang had become omnipresent: escort, interceptor, and executioner. But as the Allies closed in on Germany's borders, the air war began to change again. Dogfights grew rarer, ground attacks grew bloodier. The Luftwaffe's once proud aces were gone, replaced by boys barely trained to land. The skies were now Allied territory, and the Mustang ruled them. Yet even in dominance, tragedy still waited. The coming winter would bring the last great German counteroffensive, and with it, the deadliest season Mustang pilots would ever face. December 16, 1944. Western Front. At dawn, the Ardennes forest exploded. Fog choked the valleys, snow muffled the roads, and through that frozen silence came the roar of German armor. Hitler's last gamble, Operation Walk am Rhein, the Battle of the Bulge. Caught in the storm were tens of thousands of American troops, hemmed in by tanks and winter. Above them, the skies were useless, grounded by weather so thick that even the most daring pilots couldn't see their own wingtips. For 4 days, the air war went silent. Then, on December 23rd, the clouds broke. At every airfield across England, France, and Belgium, the orders came down in one electric sentence: all available aircraft take off and attack. The Mustangs were first. Leiston, England. 357th Fighter Group. Engines howled to life across the frostbitten field. Pilots ran, breath fogging in the icy air, boots crunching over snow-dusted runways. Ground crews yanked covers from wings as mechanics cursed the cold, stiff fuel lines. Captain Chuck Yeager, a young West Virginian with a hunter's grin, climbed into his cockpit and slapped the side of his P-51D, Glamorous Glenn. "Come on, baby," he muttered. "Let's go warm things up." The Mustangs took off in squadrons, their contrails curling like white ribbons against the blue. They climbed into a sky clear and cruel, the kind of cold that cracked skin and froze breath to glass. Below, the Ardennes burned. Columns of German armor snaked through snow-choked valleys. Every bridge, every crossroad was a target. When the Mustangs appeared, the effect was immediate and catastrophic. They came in low, 50 feet above the trees, machine guns hammering, rockets streaking, bombs falling with the precision of men who'd been waiting days for this moment. Panzer crews abandoned vehicles mid-road. Trucks exploded, ammunition carts vanished in sheets of flame. The Mustangs didn't fight for air superiority that week. They fought to save the men on the ground. December 24th, near Bastogne. Major George Preddy, one of the top-scoring Mustang aces of the war, led a formation of P-51s through the mist, hunting German fighters over the front. He spotted a flight of Messerschmitts and dove from 27,000 feet, shooting down 2 before vanishing into the haze. Moments later, anti-aircraft guns from friendly lines opened fire, mistaking him for the enemy. His aircraft hit the ground at full speed. He had 26 victories. He was 25 years old. The winter of 1944 was that kind of war, triumph and tragedy indistinguishable in the snow. But the Mustangs kept flying. By New Year's Day 1945, the Luftwaffe made its final desperate strike. Operation Bodenplatte, a massed low-level assault on Allied airfields. The Germans destroyed over 100 planes on the ground, but the cost was ruinous. More than 250 of their best fighters and pilots were lost in a single day. The Luftwaffe would never recover. In the aftermath, Allied fighters, P-51s foremost among them, owned the skies. Every German vehicle that dared move by day risked annihilation from above. Pilots spoke of the Mustang's dual nature, the predator and the protector. It had begun the war as a reconnaissance scout. Now it was guardian angel and executioner both, a machine that could shield a bomber formation one day and tear apart a tank column the next. As the snow melted from the forests of Belgium, the Mustang's shadow stretched farther east. The war's final act was beginning, and the P-51 would be there, above the bridges of Rhine, above the ruins of Berlin, over the shattered heart of the Reich. The untamed beast had carried the Allies through winter. Now it would lead them into victory. March 1944. Ramitelli Airfield, southern Italy. The heat rose off the metal runways in shimmering waves as rows of P-51 Mustangs sat lined like sleeping predators, their polished noses gleaming in the Mediterranean sun. On each, the tail was painted crimson, a defiant streak of color that would soon become legend. The men who flew them belonged to the 332nd Fighter Group, the Tuskegee Airmen, the first black American fighter pilots to enter combat in Europe. They had trained in isolation, fought for the right to fly, and now faced an enemy more insidious than the Luftwaffe: doubt. To skeptical commanders, the 332nd was an experiment. To their leader, Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., it was a promise that discipline, excellence, and endurance could silence prejudice where words never would. Their Mustangs, newly arrived from American factories, bore the Packard-built Merlin engines, the same that roared above France and Germany. But here, over the blue Adriatic and the jagged peaks of the Balkans, they faced a different kind of war. Long, lonely escort missions for the bombers of the 15th Air Force, deep into enemy territory. April 1944. Over Austria. At 25,000 feet, the contrails stretched like chalk lines against the sky. Below, the B-17s lumbered toward their target, oil refineries at Wiener Neustadt. The Germans came in waves, Me-109s and FW-190s, streaking up through the bombers' formation. The Red Tails met them head-on. Captain Roscoe Brown later recalled the moment. They came at us from every direction, 30 or 40 at a time. We didn't flinch. We turned straight into them. That's when I knew we belonged here. The fighting was brutal, tight, and fast. In that single mission, the 332nd downed multiple German fighters without losing a single bomber, a pattern that would soon define their legend. Their reputation spread through the bomber crews like wildfire. B-24 and B-17 pilots began to request them by call sign. "Give us the Red Tails," they'd say. "They'll bring us home." Historians would later debate the famous claim that they never lost a bomber, technically untrue, but spiritually accurate. Their loss rate was among the lowest in the entire 15th Air Force, a testament to their precision, teamwork, and restraint. Where other escort groups sometimes chased kills, the Red Tails guarded their bombers like shepherds guarding a flock. They flew formations so tight that gunners could see the flash of sunlight off Mustang canopies, a silent promise of protection. Colonel Davis's standing order was simple: stay with the bombers. Do your duty. Bring them home. And they did. June 1944, Ploiești, Romania. The Red Tails escorted B-24s through storms of flak so dense it turned day to twilight. Over the oil fields, the Luftwaffe threw everything it had left. Yet mission after mission, the Red Tails held the line. The red-tailed Mustangs weaving through the sky, their 6.50 caliber guns blazing in defense of the bombers they'd sworn to protect. By late 1944, the 332ND's success had become impossible to ignore. What began as a social experiment had become one of the most effective fighting units in the European theater. The Red Tails returned to Ramitelli with cracked windshields, bullet-scarred wings, and growing lists of victories, but more importantly, with a sense of vindication. Their courage reshaped not only the war, but the nation that had doubted them. January 1945. Headquarters, 15th Air Force. Colonel Davis received a personal commendation from the bomber groups his men had protected for months. Handwritten beneath it was a single line from a grateful B-17 pilot: "To the Red Tails, the best damn fighter escort in the world." By war's end, the 332nd had flown over 15,000 sorties, destroyed more than 250 enemy aircraft, and earned a place not just in the annals of air combat, but in the broader story of freedom itself. The Mustang had given them wings. They, in turn, had given the Mustangs something greater: purpose. As winter faded and the Allies advanced toward the Rhine, the red-tailed Mustangs rose from the sun-baked fields of Italy for the last great missions of the European War. Ahead lay the ruins of the Reich, and beyond that, the vast Pacific, where the Mustang story would continue under different skies. February 1945. Iwo Jima. The sea was black with ships. From horizon to horizon, American vessels ringed the smoking volcanic island like an iron halo. On the beaches, Marines clawed their way through ash and gunfire. And far above, in the cold blue sky, the next chapter of the Mustang's story waited to begin. The P-51 had already conquered the skies over Europe. Now it was being asked to do the impossible again: escort the massive B-29 superfortresses on missions to Japan across an ocean larger than all of Europe itself. Until now, the Army Air Forces had relied on twin-engine fighters and long-range bombers in the Pacific, but the distances were brutal. 1,500 miles round trip from the Mariana Islands to Tokyo. Many bombers never came back. The Mustang, sleek and light, seemed ill-suited to such vast reaches, until planners realized that Iwo Jima, once captured, could change everything. It would be the stepping stone, a forward base for Mustangs to escort B-29s all the way to Japan. March 10, 1945. Iwo Jima Airfield. The first Mustangs touched down on the island's ragged new runway, still pitted with shell craters. The air smelled of cordite and death. Marines were still mopping up resistance less than a mile from the strip. The pilots, sunburned, exhausted, slept in foxholes beside their planes. Captain William Shomo of the 82nd Reconnaissance Squadron led some of the first Mustang sorties from Iwo Jima. On January 11, 1945, before the island was even fully secured, he and his wingmen encountered a formation of 13 Japanese aircraft, 1 bomber and 12 fighters. Outnumbered more than 6 to 1, they attacked without hesitation. In less than 6 minutes, Shomo shot down 7 planes and his wingmen another 3. For his valor, Shomo would receive the Medal of Honor, the Mustang's legend now carried into the Pacific. April 7, 1945. Over Japan. At dawn, 108 P-51 Mustangs rose from Iwo Jima to escort B-29s, striking targets deep inside the Japanese home islands. It was the first long-range fighter escort mission ever launched from that tiny, blood-soaked rock. For hours they flew over nothing but ocean, the monotony broken only by radio checks and the rhythmic hum of the Merlin engines. When Japan finally appeared beneath them, green fields, smoke, and sunlight, the Mustangs dropped into a dive to meet the defending Zeros. The dogfights were savage, swirling through columns of rising smoke. Pilots described seeing the curvature of the Earth one moment and the reflection of Tokyo Bay the next. The Mustang's speed and power were overwhelming. The aging Japanese fighters simply couldn't keep up. From then on, the VLR missions, very long range, became routine. P-51s escorted B-29s to Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya, sweeping the skies clear of opposition. They also prowled at low altitude, strafing airfields, trains, and shipping. The Pacific was unforgiving. Mechanical failure meant death. No parachute could save a pilot lost over open sea. And yet they flew. They had to. The B-29 crews depended on them. Okinawa, June 1945. The Mustangs arrived in waves, joining Corsairs and Thunderbolts in strikes against the crumbling Japanese defenses. Their silver wings gleamed in the humid dawn as they attacked radar stations, coastal batteries, and the desperate kamikaze airfields still launching suicide planes against the fleet. They were the cutting edge of a campaign that had turned the tide of war, and they knew it. By August, the bombing campaign had reduced Japan's cities to rubble. Then came the unimaginable: Hiroshima, Nagasaki. The atomic age had dawned, and with it, the sudden end of the war the Mustangs had helped to win. When the surrender came on September 2, 1945, P-51s flew patrols above Tokyo Bay as General Douglas MacArthur signed the instruments of surrender aboard the USS Missouri. Below, the great battleships lay silent. Above, the Mustangs circled, a living symbol of how far the Allies had come and how high their machines could carry them. From the skies over Normandy to the farthest reaches of the Pacific, the P-51 had become not just a weapon, but a statement of endurance, innovation, and the relentless reach of American air power. The wild horse had run its race across the world and won. September 1945. Tokyo Bay. The guns had fallen silent. The flags hung limp in the still air above the USS Missouri. Across the horizon, sunlight glinted off the wings of circling P-51s, silver guardians witnessing the surrender of an empire. For 6 years, the world had been consumed by the sound of engines and explosions. Now the same machines that had ruled the skies were out of work. For the Mustang, victory brought not retirement, but reinvention. Late 1945. U.S. airfields from England to the Pacific. Rows of P-51s stood wingtip to wingtip, engines cold, paint already fading under the sun. Thousands of them, the war's fastest, deadliest single-engine fighters, now surplus to a world desperate for peace. Many were scrapped. Some were sold for a few $100s apiece. Others were crated and shipped to new owners under the banner of rebuilding nations. The Mustang's second life began not with fanfare, but with quiet necessity. 1946 to 1950. The newly formed U.S. Air Force, separating from the Army, needed an interim fighter before jet technology could mature. The Mustang, redesignated the F-51, became the backbone of this fledgling force. It served as a bridge between eras, the last of the propeller nights in a sky that was turning to flame and speed. In Europe, Mustangs flew with Allied occupation forces, patrolling the ruins of the Reich and the tense new borders dividing east and west. In the Pacific, they scouted the coasts of a defeated Japan, their presence both symbolic and practical, a reminder that air power still watched from above. But peace never lasts long. June 1950. Korea. War returned, this time in the mountains and valleys of the Korean peninsula. The jet-powered MiG-15s and F-86 Sabres would soon define that conflict's air duels, but in its first chaotic months, it was the old Mustang that carried the burden. F-51s of the 18th Fighter Bomber Group flew low over Korea's ridges, striking convoys, bridges, and troop columns. Their speed and agility still impressed, but their liquid-cooled engines remained as vulnerable as ever. Enemy ground fire shredded radiators, forcing pilots to glide miles towards safety on dead engines. Many never made it. Still, the Mustang proved what it always had been: reliable, rugged, and lethal when handled with skill. It gave the United Nations forces precious air support until jet squadrons could take over. Even as the jets roared into dominance, the P-51 refused to vanish. 1950s, 1970s. Across the world, Mustangs flew in dozens of air forces: Canada, Australia, South Africa, Sweden, Israel, and dozens more. They guarded borders, trained pilots, and in some corners of the world went to war again in small, forgotten conflicts. Wherever they flew, the sound of the Merlin echoed like a ghost from another time. Meanwhile in America, a different kind of pilot began to seek the Mustang, the civilian dreamer, the racer, the collector. War-surplus Mustangs, once sold for pennies, became the prize of air racers and veterans alike. At Reno, Nevada, in the post-war years, P-51s painted in wild colors screamed around pylons at 400 miles per hour, keeping alive the song of their youth. In time, their legend grew larger than their history. Veterans spoke of them with reverence. Children built models of them by the millions. The P-51 had transcended the war that made it. It had become a symbol of freedom, of ingenuity, of the moment when man and machine reached perfect harmony in the air. Today, fewer than 200 Mustangs remain airworthy, their Merlin engines still snarling across airshows and commemorations. Each one is a time machine, a living echo of 1944, when the fate of the world depended on the courage of pilots and the brilliance of a few stubborn engineers. When the P-51 takes off now, the ground trembles, the air vibrates, and for a heartbeat the past is present again, the wild horse lifting once more into the sun. From an accidental design to an icon of victory, from Europe's gray skies to the blue infinity of the Pacific, the Mustang's journey defined an era. It was not just a machine of war. It was proof, forged in aluminum and fire, that freedom could fly. Epilogue: the untamed beast. In the annals of flight, few names resonate like the P-51 Mustang. It began as an act of defiance, matured in the crucible of war, and endured long after peace returned. More than any other aircraft, it captured the spirit of a generation that refused to yield to gravity, to tyranny, or to time. The war ended. The world changed. But whenever a Merlin engine starts, and that fierce, unmistakable growl fills the sky, the message remains the same. The beast still runs, spring 1945. Inglewood, California. Even as the last bombs fell in Europe, the engineers at North American Aviation were already dreaming beyond victory. On a drafting table beneath the glow of a single lamp lay a strange new shape: 2 fuselages, 1 wing, a single tailplane binding them together. It looked like a mutation, a mirror image caught mid-flight. But in that hybrid form lay the next chapter of the Mustang's life, the F-82 twin Mustang. North Americans' designers knew that the jet age was coming fast. But jets were still unreliable, thirsty, and short-ranged. The U.S. Army Air Forces needed something that could escort the giant B-29 superfortresses all the way to Tokyo, or farther. The solution was not one engine, but two. By fusing two Mustang fuselages together, engineers could double fuel capacity, double range, and add a second pilot for the long, lonely missions that lay ahead. The result was part fighter, part endurance machine, two cockpits linked by a single purpose. June 1945. The first F-82 prototype took to the air over California. Its twin Merlins roared in perfect harmony, the aircraft streaking past the hangars at nearly 480 miles per hour. Test pilots called it uncanny, like flying with a ghost beside you. But the war ended before it could join the fight. The twin Mustang entered production too late for World War II, destined instead for the tense, uncertain years that followed. 1947, the Cold War dawns. The United States Air Force is born, carved from the Army's wartime air arm. In its first years, before jets fully matured, the F-82 became its long-range sentinel. It could patrol the Arctic, hunt Soviet bombers, and fly for more than 8 hours without refueling, an extraordinary endurance for a piston-engine fighter. The new world was colder, quieter, more anxious. The twin Mustang fit its time, half innovation, half nostalgia, the last of the great propeller fighters serving at the threshold of the nuclear age. June 1950. Korea. When war erupted on the Korean peninsula, the F-82 was there on the first day. Two twin Mustangs of the 68th Fighter Squadron intercepted a formation of North Korean aircraft over Kimpo Airfield, scoring the first aerial victories of the conflict and the first for the new United States Air Force. The machine born from the P-51 Shadow had drawn the opening line of the next war. But progress was merciless. Within 2 years, jet fighters like the F-86 Sabre and MiG-15 rendered propeller planes obsolete. The F-82 was reassigned to night fighter duties, then retired quietly from frontline service. Its twin cockpits went dark, its propellers stopped spinning. Yet the Mustang's spirit did not die. Every aircraft that came after, from the swept-wing Sabre to the supersonic Eagle, carried something of its DNA, the relentless pursuit of balance between speed, range, and grace. Pilots still spoke of it in reverent tones, a name whispered like a challenge and a promise. Today, only a handful of F-82 twin Mustangs survive. Most rest in museums, their twin fuselages gleaming beneath the lights, silent witnesses to a time when the future of flight was still uncertain. Visitors stand before them and see not an oddity, but a reflection, the echo of the wild horse that once ruled the skies. Because that's what the P-51 truly became, more than metal, more than engine or airframe. It was an idea that speed and precision, courage and innovation could change the course of history. From a rushed sketch in a California hangar to the frozen dawns of Korea, the Mustang shadow stretched across 3 wars and 2 generations. Its roar marked the end of one age and the birth of another. And somewhere above a quiet airfield on a clear morning, when a restored P-51 fires its Merlin and lifts into the sun, the sound rolls across the sky like memory itself, fierce, flawless, and free. The untamed beast still runs, present day. The morning air over Nevada is thin and bright. Along the edge of a desert runway, a crowd gathers, veterans in faded caps, children clutching flags, cameras raised toward the horizon. Then from far away comes the sound, a low, throaty growl that builds and builds until it fills the sky. A single P-51 Mustang breaks from the glare of the sun, banking hard and fast, its silver skin catching the light like liquid metal. The Merlin engine howls, the propeller blurs, and for a heartbeat the modern world disappears. Time folds in on itself. It could be 1944 again, England, Italy, or the Pacific, the same machine, the same sound, the same promise. The pilot pulls up, rolls, and passes low over the crowd. Beneath the canopy, the old warbird seems almost alive, not a relic, but a living soul, the echo of an age when everything depended on courage, precision, and the will to climb higher. The P-51 Mustang is no longer a weapon. It's a memory with wings. After the war, the world changed faster than anyone could imagine. Jet engines replaced pistons. Supersonic flight replaced dogfights. The sky became quieter, colder, more distant. And yet somehow the Mustang endured, not because of its technology, but because of its spirit. To veterans, it was the smell of oil and cold metal, the vibration through the stick as the Merlin came alive, the blur of tracer fire, and the silence after landing. To historians, it was the perfect convergence of design and destiny, an airplane born by accident, perfected by necessity, and immortalized by the men who flew it. To a generation that never saw the war, it became something even greater, a symbol of freedom in motion. At every airshow, when a P-51 lifts off, conversations fall silent. Heads tilt upward. The sound is unmistakable, a deep, resonant thrum that seems to come not just from the sky, but from history itself. It is the sound of invention and sacrifice, of risk and reward, of a moment when humankind and machine reached perfect balance. Epilogue, the legend that flew forever. The Mustang story is more than the tale of a fighter plane. It is the chronicle of an idea, that excellence can rise from improvisation, that courage can outfly fear, that beauty and lethality can share the same set of wings. From the cold dawns over Berlin to the coral skies above the Pacific, from the dusty hangars of Inglewood to the quiet museums of the 21st century, the P-51 remains eternal. Every surviving Mustang that takes to the air carries more than rivets and oil. It carries ghosts of pilots who never came home, of engineers who dared to dream faster, of nations that once fought for the right to be free. When its engine starts, history breathes again. When it climbs into the blue, the past lifts with it. The Mustang was born of accident, shaped by war, and preserved by love. Its story ends not in silence, but in the steady hum of a propeller turning against time, a reminder that some creations never truly grow old. As long as there are skies, there will be Mustangs. And as long as a single Merlin engine roars, the world will remember what it sounded like when freedom learned to fly. The untamed beast still runs, forever,